I will then talk now for about a quarter of an hour, really trying to give you an idea of what it's like from our end, and what you can do to help us to recognise and celebrate your work. I should say it's a great privilege to be able to read these submissions. And while we hear, a lot of gloom about the arts in schools, a lot of concerns in general, it's really extraordinary that so many schools are doing such good work, and not just in terms of the arts in themselves, but also now, I think, recognizing what the arts do for children's lives in general, and for their well-being. So, and every week I get lovely evidence of that. How I then look at it, how we look at it, is what I'm going to talk about today. So I think we've got a large kind of range of schools represented today: schools with no previous awards, schools with one or even more previous awards, and a mixture of kind of primary, secondary, special schools, PRU, I think, possibly with us. And we have to assess all these different contexts: primary, secondary, hospital schools, virtual schools. So a wide range of settings, and with wide-ranging numbers. Some are tiny rural primary schools, some are huge secondary schools. So what we have to do is have a best fit approach throughout. And for that, we have to understand the framework criteria in a range of ways and see how a school fits with those criteria, or rather how the criteria fit with them, and give us the best understanding of a school. We use that criteria, and we use the overview. If you're not very familiar with it, it's on page 5 of the framework, I think, and it just sets out in very limited number of words what's a silver, a gold, and a platinum. And we use that to guide our kind of final judgments, I guess. But in order to get there, we use the framework. Now, a lot of schools are still sending us submissions where they refer to the quality principles that are in the guidance, but that's actually not something that the assessors particularly use, because the quality principles are good descriptions of good practice for schools altogether, but they're embedded within the framework criteria, and those criteria are far more specific. So when you're looking at kind of reflecting, reviewing, planning, when you're completing your SOC or your SOI, it's good to use that framework, because you'll be doing exactly what the assessors themselves are doing. We actually will generally grade for each of the criteria in the framework when we're reading a submission, and we do that especially when it's on the borderline. And if it is on the borderline, then we have a process to moderate that. We can nominate to another assessor for a review, and the vast majority of those reviews confirm the judgment. But it's a very good way. It's also a very good way of knowing how each other are assessing. So it acts as a form of moderation as well. And finally, if there is a disagreement between assessors, which is rare, then that's resolved at a panel meeting. And then there's also blind moderation that, again, it ensures that we're all reading from the same text, as it were. In terms of what we can and can't judge, I think that's the theme of today. You really do need to understand, and I guess most of you do, but the only thing we ever see is your submissions. We're not allowed to look at anything else. Not allowed to go online. We'd love to. We'd love to visit your schools, actually, but we're not allowed to do any of that. We see what you put on a piece of paper. And for those of you who've been on a previous journey, you need to remember, and I think sometimes it is forgotten, that we will know nothing about the previous journeys. So be sure that you're not taking it for granted. We're not allowed, it's in our guidance, we're not allowed to read between the lines. and quite often we might believe there's more going on than we've been told. And it's a pity then if we can't base a judgment on that understanding. So please don't take information for granted. Particularly simple things, I think, are often easy to do, but aren't necessarily done. So kind of nuts and bolts is one of my themes. In terms of reaching a curriculum judgment, then we really do need to know the basics of what is in the curriculum. Secondary schools, I think, find that easier because they can describe the qualifications offered at Key Stage 4 and 5, and usually will describe the KS3 kind of options. But primary schools, special schools, don't always set out what the curriculum entitlement to the arts is. And that means we might not know whether dance, drama are taught as timetable subjects, what the timetable allocation for the arts overall is. So please do tell us those basics. It really shouldn't take long, and it's something you absolutely know. But if we don't know it, we're less secure in our judgment. Primaries, again, often talk about a kind of interwoven creative curriculum, which is great, but they tell us less about how the progression of the discrete arts skills is taught, particularly the expressive arts. And some will tell us about visual art. Occasionally, or quite often, we will get a submission that is only telling us about visual art, and we want to know about all the arts. And if they're not there, then that's the thing to think about in terms of telling us about your future plans and your reasoning for all that. The strongest ones we read will tell us about an extended curriculum that uses digital media, filmmaking, podcasting, those sorts of things. We do see more, which is great, about poetry and creative writing. We don't see much about reading, and that is part of the remit. And I think it's in the criteria, in fact, I'm sure it is, that libraries are a partner, and we very rarely hear about those connections. So there are things that you're probably doing that you're not telling us. And therefore we can't know them. Range of offer, I think naturally we hear about kind of exciting one-off things that have happened in a school because they excite the culture, they're talked about, they're remembered, and that's important. But often they relate those things in whatever school to the upper end of the age range. It's a strange thing that we see, and the picture can be quite bitty, therefore. What we really benefit from seeing is a kind of brief summary, again, quick summary of the entitlement, performances, clubs, visits, visitors, numbers. Simple numbers could help us with that. The stronger submissions will give us that, but they also tell us how these things contribute to the quality of learning and how they're embedded. And that comes to my kind of joining the dots theme, which I'll come to shortly. But if you can remember, if you're a primary school, what is happening for your little ones? If you're a secondary school, what about, actually, year 7 is often mentioned more because it's transitional and there's a focus on that. But what is happening to you, to all of your intake? Then again, to understand, we need to understand engagement and participation. That's pretty easy to tell us, and often we're not told, again, simple things like what is the uptake of qualifications in different subjects, and can we be given that as a kind of number like 30 out of 150 study art for GCSE? That sort of thing is, again, quite easy for you. It's information that you have, so do let us have that, because we can then gauge things. Again, uptake statistics are really helpful for things like clubs and optional experiences. Even what happens when people leave you, when they go on to their senior school there or their further education? Are they involved in the arts? Things you may know, and things to do with tracking are really interesting, where you're tracking the uptake from, say, pupil premium children, vulnerable children, and then maybe how that leads into your strategy to address issues you've noted. Boys and dance I've seen quite a lot about lately, for instance, but those are useful things for us to understand. We have to reach an overview of the impact evidence that you give us, and that's one of the things in that little box I mentioned. Silver is for tangible results, where you've observed changes and you can record them. Gold is for measurable effects. That's the words used there. Platinum is for making a difference. That's about outward facing impact, whereas gold is more about how you can measure what's going on in your school. So hearing about the measurements that you're able to make is really helpful to us. And statistics, I've seen more statistics, I think, in the last year or so, which is kind of good, except I think they're not often as informative as they can be. So we'll be told that, I don't know, the uptake of clubs has improved by 600%. But if we don't know what the uptake was before, then does that mean it's gone from 1 to 7 or from 100 to 700? So if you can give us those baseline numbers, that will help us. Otherwise, we can't really come to a conclusion. Softer data is really helpful. Quotes and surveys that show what a teacher's reaction is, what children say, what parents say about the offer. That's all great, but much better if you can join the dots about that. And if teachers are confident, then how has that changed the quality of learning? Or what different approaches are you now using? Or what evidence of improved attainment has followed, whether that's in arts learning or wider learning or mental health or whatever? Can you join the dots? We often see generalized kind of statements, and there, I'm sure that's a true perception, but we need to know more in cases. So if I'm told that something like the approach to teaching art is now much more creative, that kind of statement, that's great that you see that. But a stronger submission will tell us the story. Why did you choose to do it? How did you go about it? What were the outcomes? You know, I'm conscious that we're constantly asked for evidence, and I recall, you know, my development as a head teacher. A lot of it is dream work. You're having faith in a thing that will perhaps over time have a meaningful effect on the children. But then if that's the case, let's hear what you believe and how you've then enacted that, and what, if it has had an outcome, what that outcome is. That's your story, and that's what we really want to hear and really value. And when we hear it, it's really very moving to hear that coherent understanding of what the arts can do. So similarly, we might hear dramas improve speaking and listening, which is great, but how has it been done? Can you give us a kind of work example, a mini case study that it tells us about the process and the pedagogy there? Conversely, we do get submissions that don't show us how the arts are being used. So we might hear about, say, Forest School or rights respecting awards, and that's great. But for us, we need to know how the arts are specifically being used to support those initiatives. And the simple rule, if you can't show the arts in action there, then better not to include it, or better than that, show the arts in action, because that's great. So that's where what I mean by joining the dots. It's best done in sentences, not in bullet points. It's best if you avoid acronyms because we won't understand them. I think don't waste words on simply stating back what the wording of the framework is. We sometimes get that, and that's not telling us anything other than what the framework says. And do use the full word limit. I know that it's quite challenging to get it all done on the word limit, but quite often we will see submissions where the word limit hasn't been fully used. A few more things. I'm conscious I'm going quickly. Maybe we unpack this more in the questions and answers. We've got some newer elements of the framework. I wanted to just mention those. We revised it in 2022. Reena and I were responsible for that. And the purpose was to, several things. One, to strengthen the recognition of what was going on in schools in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion. That was significantly strengthened. To celebrate the use of the arts to support well-being and mental health, which again was beginning to come through, and personal development, and also to reflect the use of the arts to build a sense of community within and indeed beyond the school. Those are big and important things the arts can contribute to, and schools have been taking the opportunity to tell us about those. And there is clearly a recognition of these wider values of the arts. Where the submission is better is where that is developed into a kind of strategy. So tracking and developing the equity of access as well as the equality of opportunity is a big thing. So not just we make it possible for all children to go to the theatre, but how do you encourage those who are going to resist that to do it? And are you aware of what the levels of uptake are, etc.? Engaging artists and reflect and celebrate diversity, deploying arts therapeutically, using the arts to support vulnerable cohorts. These are all things that are beginning to appear more strongly, but at the moment, there's not very much about evaluating impact. And the weaker submissions we tend to see a one-off event, a day devoted to something in Black History Month or something like that, which is great, but doesn't show it to be embedded in the curriculum. And that's an important word that we think about as we go through. Finally, we did also want to strengthen the voice and agency of children and young people, the recognition of that. We hear quite a lot about pupil voice now, some of which is really framed as listening to feedback from surveys or interviewing children about their response, which is great. Others maybe have developed an arts council or student arts ambassadors, so are giving more voice, if you like, to their children and young people. But what we want to know and don't see so much is where that's translated into influence, where they have influenced decision making, or where they have developed their agency, developed initiatives of their own. And that could be stronger, and even the stronger submissions, I think, could improve in telling us about how the independent creativity of all children is fostered, and how they've found and expressed their voice. That seems to me surprisingly rare in terms of what I see in the submissions, because that's a key thing that the arts can do, and I'm sure they are doing it in the schools. So perhaps that's just about being awake to that and understanding it. And my very final point before I hand over to Reena, we see submissions that don't look as though anyone other than the person writing them has read them. And I think it would be valuable to say, do show your draft to a member of the SLT, a head teacher, or maybe to a friend, to someone who doesn't know your setting well and can say whether it's giving them that story in a way that they can understand, because that's the position we're in. So I've steamed through that. I hope that was intelligible and helpful, but Reena will no doubt correct and add to what I've said. Reena.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with everything that you said, Kevin. I should say that Kevin and I chatted about this before. And so what he's saying are the views of not just him and mine, but also of all our assessors. I just want to say a couple of things. The first one is to say thank you to you for the work that you do in developing and promoting the arts, and the fact that you've probably given up your lunch hour and then you'll have to go back into teaching. That's really appreciated and noted. So thank you for that. Just to reinforce what Kevin has said, I would say to you the biggest tip I would give you is please refer to the framework. Look at the framework and see, you know, if you've addressed the framework, you'll have a really good idea of where you fit, whether you're silver, gold or platinum. Sometimes schools will be disappointed and say, why did we get silver? We think we're gold. But if you actually look at the framework, the answer is there. That's the first thing. And the other point I would make to reinforce Kevin is to avoid assertions. So recently, I read an assessment, a submission, where the school said, we have a very robust curriculum. That's great. But they don't say what the robust curriculum is or what it looks like and how the arts fit into that robust curriculum. So yes, by all means, make those statements, but back it with examples. And it's about impact. So I think we'll stop now and we're happy to take questions.